Okay, Tanse, how are you? Atlante, my friend. I'm here with Ron Desjardin from Birch Narrows, from Turnor Lake. So my name is Jordan Burnoff. I'm from Isle Cross in Treaty 10. I'm a member of Black Lake First Nation. And yeah, just a community member. We're just gonna have a little chat today. I've been working with Ron a little bit, kind of, in my day job. And I had the opportunity to get to know him through Bonfire as well. He's an artist, musician, and a land protector. So I'll let Ron introduce himself, but I wanted to come on here and I think the message that Ron wants to share is very important, and hopefully people see the value in this and join the conversation in whatever way you see that looking like. But I'll let Ron introduce himself.
Okay, my name is Ron Desjardin, not Desjardins.
Not my cousin.
I live at Narrows, Turner Lake. I work as elder advisor for the Birch Narrows Dene Nation. And I got kind of involved with some of the stuff that's been happening with industry exploration in our area here. And it's been kind of a bit of I'm finding out as to how the ministry works and some of the going ons in there, I guess. But so far, I've been writing letters to the ministry, um, not quite getting the response that I would like to hear.
Mm-hmm.
I've also been doing a lot of research in caribou management, and I certainly discovered a lot of things that have to do with woodland caribou as I began to launch a bit of research on my own here. Some things that I've been discovering are found out that in the species risk with Canada, the species,
Mm-hmm.
I think it's called the Species at Risk Act.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah, and caribou was by then, back in the early 2000s. I guess that is quite late 2012. But they identified woodland caribou as a species that, and well, they've divided our area with the woodland caribou habitat as to the boreal plains, which is in Ear area and all across that way. And then ours is in the boreal shield because we're just kind of on the edge of it. And so there are vast differences between both. I believe that the boreal plains study has been completed. I think I can't speak for sure, but I think it has been. And right now, from what I understand, the study that they've been doing with the boreal shield was supposed to be completed in June of this year. Um, I guess I don't know where that's at the moment. I'm not getting too much of the of confirmation or anything from the ministry for that, but I know they're lagging behind on a lot of those studies. And some of the tables that I looked at, it was really interesting that Saskatchewan was pretty slow at getting this done because Canada had mandated them to back in 2012, I believe. Again, had mandated them within 5 years to get this study done regarding woodland caribou as to how they're going to put in measures that would work toward conservation and just making sure that there were strategies in place, action plans, and they call them range plans to ensure the survival of the caribou, and in some cases to bring them back to where they're supposed to be at, to identify the 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 threshold level for for survival of the caribou within their habitats. Um, so from my research, what I found was that about 5 years later, about 5 years later, Saskatchewan hadn't even begun the study, or hadn't completed anyway, but I think they hadn't even begun from what I see. So that kind of tells me something. But anyway, I mean, that's just from my own perspective. But I found that very interesting. And apparently now they've been doing things. So I did find another source when I was talking with someone from the ministry, and they referred me to one of their agencies there, and finding more information as to where they're at with the study. Yeah.
Okay. And so this is like, these are provincial initiatives, right? Like these are conducted by the province,
Yes.
by what, the Ministry of Environment for Saskatchewan?
Yes. Um,
Okay. And is that knowledge supposed to be public?
it's supposed to be public. Um, see, I didn't know that. I don't even know if we were ever informed at this level we may have been as to
Mm-hmm.
participating in the study, and I've asked as to which communities were involved regarding the boreal area. I've I've asked for names too as to who is in which people are involved. I kind of like to know if any of our people got involved in the study from this end here.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I look at our own caribou up here, and it really concerns me because of the fires. I mean, everyone that lives in Saskatchewan knows already how much of our land has burned within the last 20 years.
Mm-hmm.
Been very devastating for the woodland caribou because a large portion of their habitat has been burnt out. And I
Yeah.
know that for sure because I've hunted up north here, and I know there's vast sections of land where the caribou were thriving are no longer there anymore.
Mm-hmm. And I think like just for the general population, anybody that's watching, like and you can speak to this much better than I can, Ron, but the habitat that caribou exist in, like their habitat is very lush, right? So that's where a lot of our medicines, clean water, and those are like muskeg areas, right? Like mossy, very, very lush, rich area. So, not only it impacts everything in the ecosystem, right? It's like, it's not just the caribou. I think, you look at what's happening in La Ronge. There's a lot of work being done to save peat moss, and there's like a peat moss, like a mining initiative happening over there. Sorry, I don't know too much about it. Miriam Corner, one of my buddies, she's kind of leading that and can speak to that a little bit better. But once those areas are impacted, it's not only caribou but all of the other species that kind of I think the way that I understand it is that like the caribou is kind of like at the heart of our ecosystem, right? Like once that's impacted, it's kind of a chain reaction of everything else around it.
Okay, just give me a second here. My dog is bugging me.
Okay. And yeah, just like on another note, in Iowa Cross, like and so this was kind of, my mind was getting a little confused, but Isla Cross has a project right now that is to protect the Antipodean fir block. That's from Pachinak, Beauval, Buffalo Narrows, and Isla Cross. So that section of land, there's a research project it's a multi-year project, and that's happening right now, and its focus is land and trappers areas, but it's very much surrounded around caribou ecosystem, right? So that's where that like provincially led research project is super interesting, because it's like, why wouldn't that information be there to support communities in these quests, right? Unless there's like, yeah, it's interesting.
You see, I mean, I think we all know historically what has been going on. Policies are usually drafted without our input. That's been the trend for the longest time, and
Yeah.
and and now today, even when they do go through that process, a lot of times things are left out. And a good example of that is the current um, duty to consult policy. A
Yeah.
lot from then when they consulted and sat down with the Indigenous peoples regarding this policy, they walked away from the
Mm-hmm.
table, drafted their policy, and basically a lot of what the Indigenous peoples wanted in the policy didn't come out. I mean, that's
Huh.
what I get from people that I've spoken to that were involved with this.
And that's a provincial policy?
Yeah, that's a provincial policy. So they went ahead and drafted it anyway, and
Okay.
I critiqued that policy, and I actually did a presentation. Buckley was there too, on it. I had invited Buckley over
Okay.
and land users, and but the policy itself is it has contradictions. It's
Mm-hmm.
it's like there's pretension to it. It's not doing what it said it's doing, or what it's supposed to be doing, and part of that is uh, recognizing our Indigenous rights. You know, whether First Nations or Métis. It says right in the policy that it
Yeah.
recognizes land rights to Indigenous peoples. So when you approach a document uh, with the guy, like, you know, you're with the idea of protecting our rights and ensuring that they're going to consult with us, um, and then to go and create a document that actually works against us just didn't make sense, you know. And
Mm-hmm.
this document they're using, because even with proponents, like people who actually apply for permits, um, they're not. How should I say? They're not fully encouraged to engage with Indigenous peoples. Even the proponent handbook itself, it's called a voluntary proponent handbook. You know,
Mm-hmm.
for me, if you're going to go through this whole process of the duty to consult, well, it shouldn't be voluntary. It shouldn't, because what
Mm-hmm.
you're saying to people who are actually coming and starting to do exploration and stuff, go ahead and do it. And, you know, you don't really have to sit and meet with Indigenous peoples, right? So, I mean, that's how I
Yeah.
viewed that.
Well, and then you,
Yeah,
oh, sorry, go ahead.
yeah, I'm done. Yeah.
I was just gonna say, look at like at a federal level, at like, well, even global, right? And you look at UNDRIP, so the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. That's one of the things is, you know, free or um, prior and informed consent, right? Um, so like, what does that mean, right? And Canada ratified that. So, you know, where does that fit into this whole conversation on a global level for the rights for Indigenous people around the world, right? Like at a very like localized kind of focused area, which would be Birch Narrows, like that's where this impact is, right? And then it's gonna like just kind of continue to trickle and impact bigger regions. Like I think our boreal forest is what it's one of the biggest pieces of masses of forest right now that's kind of saving us from the impact of climate change, right? And with caribou being impacted, like then what happens, right? But let's go back to your talk on that agreement. I'm super interested in that. I have it's the woodland caribou boreal population in Saskatchewan. So it's the draft conservation agreement. That's what you're referring to, correct?
Well, yeah, this was the agreement that Canada made with Saskatchewan
Okay.
regarding management, and it was. Uh, I think they've updated it. Um, the one that I have right now, it was signed on June the 19th of 2019.
Okay.
Yeah, and and
Oh, sorry.
basically the purpose was to set out conservation measures
Mm-hmm.
to support recovery of woodland caribou in Saskatchewan. So this all involves with habitat management, the landscape itself, population management, monitoring,
Mm-hmm.
out the mortality rates. Um, it also says to provide for collaboration and partnership with First Nations and Métis that have a direct interest in the recovery of woodland caribou,
Mm-hmm.
and to provide for collaboration and partnership with organizations and persons, municipalities, and individuals, recreational industry, um, anyone that has an interest in recovery of woodland caribou. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
just basically the whole process of engaging, scientific research. Uh,
Yeah, I'm just looking at the information sharing piece right now, which is kind of what you were inquiring about, right? Like what happens to that data now that they've collected, and have they, and where does it go? But in this agreement, it says each party agrees, subject to any applicable data sharing arrangements and legislative provisions that would prevent them from doing so, to provide other party access at no charge to available data and information relevant to the implementation of this agreement, including information on the status, conservation, and recovery of woodland caribou, including habitat protection, restoration, and other conservation measures. So
they did
that's
they did have a little clause in there too that has to do with confidentiality, which is what I read. See, here's the hit with us here, because we have this company that wants to do some exploration in our the area that they're trying to do the exploration in is it's like floating muskeg. The whole area is
yeah.
prime habitat for caribou, and uh, and that's what kind of piqued my interest as to, okay, what's going on here, right? And it, and
Mm-hmm.
we was trying to. What I found interesting was that the ministry was more willing to go to bat for the company than for us. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
of the environment, because even whenever I would write letters and talk about my own concerns, with the caribou in the area, they were they fell on deaf ears. They were always kind of, pushed aside, and and that really bothered me. Even with the whole idea of information sharing, I was told that there had been some studies made, and so I asked for those studies. I asked if I could see that information, and I was told that they couldn't share it with me. And the Ministry of Environment.
Interesting. So I was helping with the care, or not the care, but the N14 fur block project, right? I was telling you about that earlier. One of the things that I was curious about, and maybe Peter's watching this and he can answer us, but we interviewed a lot of trappers and bushmen, really, and they told us, this is where you find medicines. This is where we last saw caribou. This is, like all the secrets. I was just like, oh my God, I'm gonna be a good hunter now. I still suck. but but no, like that information, right? That's gold. That's what people like. That's generations of knowledge passed down. So from that perspective, I'm super curious as to like how that information is protected as these studies move forward, like from, a personal perspective. But when somebody's doing like GIS mapping and using a drone to count caribou and looking at the different ecosystems, that's a different story, right? Like how do we know what kind of monitoring? But that goes to like every industry, right? Like
Yeah.
I'm sure you're familiar with like, this kind of same kind of thing happening for many years, right? With mine and exploration companies.
Well, what really got me going was when I read the proposal, and
Mm-hmm.
and the company stated in their proposal that there were no endangered species in the area because he checked the Ministry of Environment's GeoHub, I think they call it,
Okay.
and he said there was nothing there that told him there were any endangered species in the area, and that kind of got
Mm-hmm.
me. And I said, and I told him there are endangered
Yeah.
species in the area, and now I'm kind of pushing the ministry to tell them that, to let
Yeah.
them know, you know, and but it's the thing that really concerns me and that really bothers me is that they have to listen to us. They need to listen to us. They need to actually take. See what I don't like, and I know we've all faced this, but we always get this. We get patronized, and I really hate that. You know,
Mm.
those
Yeah.
people pretend they listen to us, but nothing with any meat ever really comes out of it. We just get the bare bones. You know, we always get, and I hate that we shouldn't have to get that. You know, because
Mm-hmm.
if the whole premise, you know, within the recent movement, even with the duty to consult, UNDRIP, TRC, with all these things coming down the pipe, and they need now to seriously start considering us as partners, you know,
Mm-hmm.
part of
Yeah.
the process. Like, don't leave us out of this. And I know the whole thing is that because we've been socialized for so long, everybody kind of knows their role, you know. And I'll just give you a little quick story again. I grew up with this where I would hear my dad because they never wanted to fight the system, and he would say, "Kiam, mananto, it's okay, it doesn't matter," you know. Elder told me a story of my father coming to the shoreline. He just went out to go get, and this was during commercial fishing season. He went out to go get fish for us to eat for the evening.
Yeah.
When he got to the shoreline, there was resource officers standing on the shore there. When he came to the shore, they looked in his boat and said, "Mr. Desjardin, you don't have any ice." So they gave him a ticket. And my dad went to court, pled guilty, monanto, it's okay, paid a fine, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Traditionally, that's kind of how we've been, you know, we've been going through our lives. Even my grandma, I remember she used to always say, "Munya, waka get matsamanto ka kiwig skitakwa." And
Ah, the
that's
demon.
so the minute, the minute we want to express our issues and our concerns, and then we're kind of brushed aside, then we just leave it. We walk away from it. It's happened too many times. And
Mm-hmm.
and this whole idea, yeah, we'll listen to you, but meanwhile, already the plans have been in place. You see, and the thing that really bothers me with the whole duty to consult process is, to use an old cliche, you know, you're putting the cart before the horse. And so by the time
Mm-hmm.
us, there's already plans in place. They've already set up in most cases. They've already set themselves up. We didn't even know all of that stuff. Permits were already granted, you know, and that's what really bothers me. It's not a duty to consult. You're just saying we're going to tell you what we're going to do. That's how it works, you know. So yeah, that's
Mm-hmm.
why I need to consult Paul.
That's interesting. Yeah, there's the new like federal legislation. What is it? Bill C-92, I think it is, and that was had to do with pipelines, right? So this is like a little bit different, but kind of same thing. And as a part of this little session we did with a CEO of an oil company, I'll just leave it at that. And one of my questions was on that, and what role does that play in the grand scheme of your project, right? Like, how have you consulted? And they said, well, it doesn't affect us. And I said, well, why not? Like, how do you where's your loophole? I want to hear your secret. And he just said that, I think what it came down to was they bought that land. That land was annexed. They bought it, and then they said it's not Indigenous land. And so they were able to to continue their project, right? And I think, and then, you know, like, who holds government accountable for that kind of stuff? That's my question.
See, that's the thing, right? Um, I mean, every one of us that we were raised on this land and
Yeah.
look at it and we say that's our land. And at the moment, in reality, it's not. You know, a farmer can look out on his field and say, well, that's my land. And on paper, it is, right? And
Mm-hmm.
and that's the thing that kind of really bothers me, because there are so many things coming down the pipe, like I said, with UNDRIP and TRC and really to consult and all these other movements and things that are happening with the government. Um, One of the hardest things that I find with our people is believing that we actually do have a connection to inherent rights. We
Yeah.
do, you know, and we need to get
Mm-hmm.
our mind that we don't, because that's what we've been told for so long. And
Mm-hmm.
it is becoming more knowledgeable, I guess. I mean, if we don't develop if we don't pursue knowledge in terms of trying to find out where we're at as Indigenous peoples regarding these issues, and then we can't develop a vision. But I think the
Yeah.
more we are as what has happened and what we can do today, and then yeah, we can get a vision to be able to try and set up something down the road for our children, for our grandchildren, so that
Mm-hmm.
can be like a farmer and say, yeah, that's ours. We own that. It's our land, you know. And I
Yeah.
can't wait for that day to come. And
Mm-hmm.
and my vision is that yeah, someday we can see that. Because you
Mm-hmm.
look, what do we have? 220,000 square kilometers of Treaty 10 territory. Why was it designated as Treaty 10 when I myself am a member of Treaty 10 and I have to get a permit from the province in order for me to go build on it? Doesn't make sense, you know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yes. There's a lot of really interesting comments coming in on the side here. I don't know if you can see those, but we
Okay.
don't care about our rights, this
Yeah.
guy says.
Yeah. Yeah.
It should be a given. We hold the knowledge and encourage education, and educated keeps on educating. First Nations people have the knowledge, and it's so important. Can't let it die.
True. True. And I like this one too. There was one before that, uh, just before the other comment. Yeah, right there. They don't care about our rights or the land and water. They want it. So that's the
Yeah.
thing. Underneath all of that is they want this, want it all. And
Mm-hmm.
that's what we're fighting. They have no interest. They try to pretend they do, but they've got tricky little, they're good at these things as to how they can go about working. And on duty to consult policy is one of them, as to how they can go about doing this and take away what we do have. And it's going to
Mm-hmm.
take a lot of work on the part of our Indigenous people to be able to stand up to that and say, no, no, stop, And that's kind of what we're trying to do with this company here and saying, look, stop. We don't have enough time. We need time. We have to talk about it with our community. If you go ahead and proceed with this, it's a negative thing. And I think if honestly, from what I'm reading from my community, if they do go ahead and do this, I think our community will rise up. I think they'll go over there and say, "No, you're not using this guy's trap line," because that's the other issue too.
Yeah.
I just talked with him yesterday. They want to use his trap line to travel on back and forth, and they haven't even consulted with the trapper himself, and we pointed out, and so
Mm-hmm. Well, I've heard stories of that too, where they're actually like pulling trappers' cabins right out of the bush. They just say this is crown land, and that's that. There's
yeah,
nothing you can do, right? And I think like to this note, rights about land and water. I think like that's almost double-sided. And not to say that our people don't care, because I think we do, but I think we need to care to a point that there's collective action. And I think, Ron, you've been talking about this. I haven't known you very long, but we've had some pretty incredible talks, and I know that you're very passionate about this work. And I think more people need to be passionate about it, for one, but also like come up with a plan, right? Like Ron sent me a list of questions that he sent to the provincial government, and didn't get the response that he wanted, or anybody wants, right? Which is like, we have no information for you. Essentially, this is not for you to know yet or ever, So, but I think that's one of the biggest missing things. So people, if you're not sure about how to take action or what to do, like, we need to have some sort of an organized structure where these kinds of things and concerns are taken. And the power of many is a little bit greater than the power of one. So I think like we need to think from that perspective, that like how and be strategic about it, right? Like government exists, and there's a lot of things that we can't change, but how do we work kind of like what is it, cross jurisdictionally with Métis and First Nations, and the provincial government? Like, I don't know, what do you think, Ron?
It's the uh, David versus Goliath, right? The government has the capacity to be able to throw their jargon at us, their documents, their whatever at us, right? We don't have that. But what we do have, and for a lot of us, is this entrenched um, love for our land, for
Yeah.
where we live, and and we can't lose sight of that. We need to be able to pass that on to the generations that are following us, and just to let them know how important this is. I mean, you look at people who live in the city and what they have to live with. Man, it must be tough. Like if you get hungry, you can't go knock on someone's door and ask for a loaf of bread. Uh, Here, if I get hungry, if I want fish, I'll just go drop a net or drop a hook to bring home my supper, right? And
Yeah.
and we take that for granted in our
Hmm.
for a lot of us, and we have to really, really think about preserving this, because what are we going to have down the road? And some of the questions that I asked, and hopefully people will ask too, is that we need to set aside and when I think about this habitat, this area back here that's prime for caribou, I think
Hmm.
a large section of that land can be set aside for future generations as indigenous territory, as an indigenous recognized as a
Like protected lands.
protected land. and
Yeah.
and and I've talked with I talked with a trapper this morning, and I was saying we ourselves too, we need to start thinking about how can we conserve and protect what we have right now. How can we
Mhm.
make it better for the caribou population? Maybe we need to stop saying, like, we need to stop and agree that we're going to only shoot a certain number, so much per hunter, that kind of strategy, you know and those are serious talks that we really need to have, especially even with moose and things like this, right? We need to
Yeah.
read, because in a lot of ways, I know there is one study that I came upon that they did further up north, but and it kind of touched into our area here too. But what they found was that it's not the indigenous people that are making it difficult for the population, for the woodland caribou. It's it's industry, and for here, it's a combination of that, especially for you guys on your end. But fires too are a big concern, and when the government came out with, yeah, it is endangered. The animals are endangered now. We need to protect them. Regarding caribou, and yet they let the land burn. I just didn't understand that. They let their habitat burn.
Mhm.
So they got to rethink this. Whatever is out there right now, we don't even know how much
Yeah.
of like how much of this habitat in our local area do we have? We don't even know, and yet they want to allow industry to come in here. You know?
And we got to question that too, right? Like why are there those let it burn policies or whatever it is, right? Like does that clear the land so then now it's like, a brown field or whatever they call it, and now it's like open for auction pretty well. Like I don't know, that's just where my mind goes, but I'm skeptical of things. But
But
um okay.
yes, it's obvious. How
Pardon?
can we see it, right? How can we not? I
Mm-hmm.
mean, and I myself, I lost a couple of trap lines, and it's going to take a
Yeah.
lot of work to open it up. By the time there's animals entering that area, well, I'm going to be too old now, right? But that feeling, they want to burn us out. That whole concept of that Latin word, I think, terra nullius, nobody lives, nobody's using that land, nobody's on it.
Mm-hmm.
That's to get us off as indigenous land users so that
Mm-hmm.
say, well, you guys aren't using it anyway.
Yeah. Well, you look at that from a bigger scale. That's like, look at where was it in Brazil? In the Amazon. They were like literally just burning the forest, right? There was people saying it was the government that was burning that land, and then it's useless, right? And then somebody bought it, and eventually, well, it's always worth something, but just gives them an opportunity to go in and now take it over.
Yeah.
I want to go back to your point where you were talking about like us as people as hunters and people that are using the land and that talk about protecting and conserving and really thinking about how many animals are we killing per year. I'm safe, I'm not killing any, I'm a real shitty hunter. so but for real, like in those interviews I did with the old trappers, they were telling me stories of back in the day in Isle Cross. Anyways, this is how it went. There was about 7 or 8 families that would meet, and then they would say, okay, this family, you guys have a really big family, so you have like 3 moose, and then this family gets 1, this family gets, and then they would count, as these trappers are out there, they would count how many moose they saw, how many beaver they saw, and they would divvy it out so that they can like ensure that the population was there for years to come, and now people are just like going and dropping 3 moose on one hunt, and it's like, for who? Like, who are you feeding everybody? Or so young men or women, I don't know a lot of women hunters, but young men, people, even old guys, I don't know, people that are out there hunting, like think about that. You want to keep hunting, your kids to keep hunting, like we've also got to think about our role in all of that. And that hurts to say because that's a big part of people's lives and livelihood, but we're kind of contributing in a small way. But yeah, like you said, the big pain comes from industry. So
One of the things that I really want to point out for my community anyway, I can't speak for other communities, but one of the things that I'm really proud to see is our young people actually going out there, using the land. And here's another thing that fills me with pride. A lot of them are coming back and sharing it with elders.
yeah.
And for me, um, that fills me with pride because there's value there,
Yeah.
and value elders. It means something to them. They're not just doing it to fill their freezer. They're doing it and sharing it with others.
Mm-hmm.
So for some of them, I mean, they might come back with 2, 3 moose, but for a lot of them, they're sharing it. It's just
Yeah.
going into their freezer. You know, and that's the striking difference between I hate to use the word, and I don't want to sound racist, but white people, right?
Yeah.
Different, right? But I really, really appreciate when I see that with our young people because
Yeah.
they're doing that. Yeah.
Definitely. And I'm not trying to shame anybody. I hope nobody took offense to that, because like sometimes that's what we know, right? Is like this is how I was taught to hunt, or like some of these things are carried forward, but we need to now kind of be a little more conscious, especially with caribou, right? Like, you leave them for 1 or 5 years and the population slowly starts to build back, and
Well, I
sad,
think,
but
I mean, we're in a day and age now that people go everywhere now. We got GPS, we got high-powered snow machines. You can drop an animal at half a kilometer away with these rifles.
yeah.
That's no, you know. But yeah, that's what we really need to look at ourselves. And I've been I got my son on there.
And you're so wise.
Thank you, my boy. But you see, now he's got me off track.
Sorry. I'll warn you before I pull up another comment here.
No, we have to really self-reflect. I think we really need to start thinking about a lot of this stuff, and talk about preservation for ourselves here. And right now, the population of the moose is healthy.
Yeah.
Okay, but yeah, the caribou is a bit worrisome. I think we need to really consider that too and start talking about those issues. It's unpleasant for a lot of us. We don't really want to face it or admit to it, but I've hunted for many years, and I think it's time for us to start thinking about it now. Yeah, because I remember years ago, and like I took out my boys when they were young out hunting, and I remember one time we were skinning a moose, and one of my boys looked at me and said, "Dad, when I get older, I want to do this with my children." And I remember at that time thinking, "Wow, I hope so." I really hope so, because I was already beginning to see, I don't know if we'll have this, because we kind of had that sense of helplessness, right?
Mhm.
Um, but he did it. He was able to do that. So we can preserve this. We can pass it on for other generations coming.
Mhm. So here's a thought. Here's something I often think about, and like this goes for not just on the topic of environmental issues or kind of where we're at, but kind of across different sectors. So we talked about, people are tired of not being heard, so people have almost given up.
Yeah.
And even that point you made about, your dad going to get fish and getting stopped by the COs and saying like, here's a fine, and people are going to hunt. I mean, yeah, hunt and fish to get their food because we go to our stores and food's ridiculously priced. So I think one of the things that it often leads me to think is like we're still kind of in like a survival mindset
Yeah.
of like, or even like oh, nothing will come to our community, so it's not even worth trying, or or like we're still almost like okay with just getting a little bit, just getting our little ration here, and it's like, man, we're not there anymore. We don't have to like be in our head in that way, and we can thrive. So what are your thoughts on that piece?
That that's a good point. And I've thought about that for a long time, because we become our worst enemies in a lot of ways in our communities. I mean, we can go and talk about lateral violence. It's prevalent in just about all of our communities. It's prevalent in our organizations. Um, and until we can get our own act together, the government's just going to be happy looking at us fighting. You know, Even with First Nations and Métis, we need
Mhm.
to be able to look at as collective. We've got to fight this together. We can't say, "Well, I'm a Métis and I'm First Nations."
Yeah. Well, that was actually a strategy, right? Was like divide and conquer. We don't even, we're doing it ourselves.
Yeah, ourselves. We bought into it.
Mm.
Now And that's where education is so important for us to understand and our people to understand. We have to stop doing this.
Mm-hmm.
We have to start valuing each other, valuing our own people, and putting them at the forefront, because those are the ones that have the vested interest in what is going on around us.
Yeah.
Okay? The people that come into our communities, we see so many of them, especially on reserves, and I call them sharks because they swim around trying to make a buck because they know how to do it and
Mm.
they're really good at it. And I've seen so many over the years, and and our people put more trust in them than they would into someone like me. But that is changing. In a lot of ways, it's starting to change. I think a lot of our leadership are beginning to see those things.
Yeah.
Still have a lot of work to do there. There's so much more to do.
Mm-hmm.
And until we get to that point where we begin to recognize why we're doing this, and we stop and begin to reflect and begin to make changes in our own personal lives, then we can start making, then we can start really, I hate to use the word fighting, but I can't think of any other word at the moment, but collectively we can start telling the government, you got to listen to us. But right now they're looking at us, they're seeing what's going on,
Yeah.
they know the game. Yeah, so
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, I think this goes to everybody watching and even not watching. What are those small actions that you can take within your own grasp, within your capacity to do things, right? And like for me today, mine was coming on here and talking to Ron because this is important, and these conversations, maybe the right person will hear it, maybe nobody will hear it, but I think as if we start to open up these conversations and open up people's minds to what's happening around us. It's we're so distracted right now by COVID and
Yeah,
you
so,
know
but I
too
think
busy being bored.
yeah too, because we have such a failure mindset, we've had that for years. We need to celebrate the two steps we took forward and the one step we took back. If we can recover from that and take another two steps, well, we made progress, right?
Yeah.
And I think we need to be able to start thinking that way. Yeah, we're only human. We might go step back, but if we can take the time to really reflect and make a choice to do something to make it better for ourselves and for our people, for our children, really, that's what it's for. Be-
Hmm.
Because if this continues, honestly, if we continue what we're doing, we're going to implode, you know.
Yeah.
But
So I have a question for you.
yeah,
So industry is not going anywhere, right? People are still going to drive their vehicles. There's still uranium is still going to be pulled from the earth. All of these things are still going to happen. So, I always try to like put myself somewhere not in the neutral zone, because that's not helpful to anybody. But in this zone of like, okay, so devil's advocate for industry, but also like just being real and who I am and what I'm passionate about. So, um, it's like those things aren't going anywhere. So, how do you see these processes moving forward in the best way? Like, I know consultation is something that's almost like a swear word in communities, right? Like people they don't want to hear that anymore, right? Because it's bullshit. It doesn't happen the way, excuse my language, but it doesn't happen the way that they say or that it's supposed to, right? So what would you say, how do you envision, like good pathways forward, and what do you think that communities can do to actually like catalyze those actions and start taking ownership and being partners and bigger pieces of those conversations, right? As opposed to like, I think one of the things is like, as much as I don't want to be on the side of industry and extractive beings that exist, it's like it's not, it's kind of on that context of like, if you can't beat them, join them, but not definitely not that, but like, you know, being in that room, being able to have some say over, you know, what happens, like how do you view that, how do you deal with that, because that's something that just troubles me like all the time.
Well, I'm still in the same position you are because I mean you do get conflicted, right? Um, but I think what needs to be done is the whole process has to be meaningful engagement. You know, none of this a pat on the head, give you a little sucker, and send you off. You know, that's no good. That's not meaningful engagement.
Yeah, you fooled me once.
Yeah, there you go. You see.
Yeah.
Now, now the other thing is beneficial. Uh, if industry is going to go ahead, then we can't just get pennies out of it. We need to be a big part of that whole process for our community. You know, you look at the things that are happening through to our environment. I mean, Rod Gardner posted that thing with Clough Lake. You know, and how it wasn't properly um, um, dismantled, or it wasn't properly done at the end. Right?
Yeah, my dad had a camp up there, a
Yeah.
deer camp.
So you see now you wonder like how many people are contaminated or what's going on over there, right? And what's happening in the environment. It's pretty scary stuff, right? But I think in a lot of ways, you see, here's what we got to do. Uh, well, of course, like I said, meaningful consultation. We need to be viewed as partners, not coming to us. We own that section of land. We want it, right? But coming and saying we recognize that you have inherent title to this land. So let's sit down and let's talk. We'll talk about what your benefits are going to be. We're going to talk about, okay, what would you like to see there? Because it's always that idea of that's mine. I'm going to do whatever I want to do with it, you know? No, it's not. It's actually now you need to sit down with us so you can engage us in this whole process, right?
Mm-hmm.
You look at uranium industry, my goodness, I think that there's been a lot of improvements in the last ever since Gunner and all these other stuff with Uranium City that have happened, right? I think there's been a lot of improvements. I think the government has really pushed hard against uh, Gunner happening again. You know, somebody needs to take ownership for it. But there again, it's government. We don't know who's going to be empowered coming down the road, and
Mm-hmm.
the kind of that I still grapple with is sure there's short-term benefits. We're going to pull out billions when it comes to uranium mining, but now we have to deal with the poison now. Where
Yeah.
to put it? Okay, and we might all agree. Okay, all right, let's put it here. It's really safe. But who's going to make sure that nothing's going to happen to that 10,000 years down the road? Who's going to be there? The company's not going to be there anymore. The funds are going to dry out. I know they're held accountable to make sure that it's all clean and that there's money put aside for down the road, but I know it's not good for 10,000 years, you
Yeah.
know? So there are so many questions in that area because that poison is not going to go anywhere. It's, it's going to take millions of years, thousands of years to, uh, to decay. It's going to
Yeah.
take a long, long time.
Well, and they say like the argument is always that you look at like the energy sources we have right now, right? Is like the waste and contaminants that go out into the earth, into the atmosphere, you know, that's far greater than what's left over from uranium, from using uranium, from um but then yeah, that's the thing, right? Is like we actually don't have a safe method of storing it. So, you know, like and you can't say what's going to happen in 100 years.
And when you talk about like plants, even with can-do reactors,
Yeah.
about setting those up in Saskatchewan. Uh, I mean, one of those rods, from what I understand, if you're a meter away, it's fatal. You're
Hmm.
done, toast. You know, that's how deadly that stuff is. So,
Yeah.
but I think the whole idea is, again, I go back to that. We need to become knowledgeable. We need to be able to take the time to understand a lot of this stuff. We can blindly say, well, I'm against nuclear energy. Why? Well, it's no good for our, well,
Yeah.
let's talk about what's no good.
Hmm.
We need data. We need to be able to have, uh, we need to know what we're talking about. We can't
Yeah.
make assumptions about it, you know.
Hmm.
Yeah, we do that well. I mean, I do thing over and over, and I'm learning too, right? Uh,
Yeah.
but when it comes to uranium industry, yeah, we need to understand, and that's why we need to have these engagement sessions with uh, uh, anti-nuclear activists, pro-nuclear activists, people down the middle. Hear from
Hmm.
sides, and then
Yeah.
make your own judgment as to where we should go.
Hmm.
Yeah, it's not an easy solution. It
Yeah.
is.
So, yeah, I think that's one of the interesting things too. And you look at like the uranium industry. Um, I did this exercise once. We all stood on a map. It was like this big Canadian geographic map. It was like the size of a big room. And I was in Saskatchewan. I was the only person in the group from Canada, and that was from Saskatchewan. Or no, there was another guy from Saskatchewan. Anyways, but we had like uranium in Saskatchewan, right? And then it showed where energy came from and where it went. So the export for uranium was like, I think it was more than like 70% was just out of Canada. So, like, and then you look at Saskatchewan and we run off of like some places still run off of coal. Like, so it's so funny, that we have these sources and like for people that don't know, like nuclear energy is said to be one of the cleanest forms of energy, and I think it is, right, in terms of like waste and everything process, but it's that waste, right, that end product, it's not safe. So that's the big thing, that's always the part of conversation we miss out on. But so here's something I've been battling with, Ron, and I don't know. Maybe even people watching, you can tell me if you think I'm crazy. But I was invited by a mine company to MC or facilitate conversations for an event, and immediately I was like, screw uranium. Like, look what happened with Cameco, and I just have like all these like ill feelings, because of what's happened historically, right? But then I'm also, that part of me is like, man, but you want to be in the room, you want to be a part of the conversation and ensure that, the right things are coming out and people are informed and are a part of it. So I've been kind of battling that the last few days, is like, ethically, where do I stand on that? And I think I'm towards like, I think it's important to be a part of that conversation. And one of the things that I asked was like, is this happening already? Like, are there agreements and partnerships made with communities on your mining projects, your exploration projects? And they said no. Like, this is the consultation part of the process. And so I don't know, I've just been kind of digging around and like curious as to how these things are evolving, how these processes are evolving, and how those like relationships with industry are happening, right? Because they're not going anywhere, as much as people, you know some people love it because that's their jobs, their livelihood. Some people hate it because we love to live in the bush. But yeah, I'm just curious here. I need some guidance.
It's a wonderful opportunity to 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 create awareness, uh, to teach, because the population at large, like what we termed as a dominant society, there's so many misconceptions. They don't understand who we are as Indigenous peoples. Okay, I'll just kind of go off here on a little bit of a tangent. But um, I attended a conference in Toronto a couple of years back, and I went with my daughter there. It had to do with the community food centers of Canada, and uh, and they did this little activity where they took a bunch of us into this room, and they would make a statement or pose a question, and if you agreed, you would go on one side of the room, and if you totally disagreed, you go on the other side of the room, right? And the statement was made that justice is fair for all in Canada, right? And here's what happened. This was really interesting because I didn't know that there was another Indigenous lady in the group. After we moved, we stood alone on the other side where we told, and all these other young people were way over here on the other end. Then we had a chance to educate them and tell them why. And this, and I remember talking a bit about what happened to Colton Boucher, you know, and a lot of these issues that we have in Canada. But this is all tied in because here's a great opportunity to be a part of a process where if you are allowed to speak, right, in that, to be able to educate and bring awareness to a lot of what our people are thinking, because I think that needs to be done. I think
Mhm.
a lot of these people honestly do not understand us. They
Yeah.
have idea. They don't walk in our, I was going to say moccasins. Not too many of us wear moccasins anymore. But they don't walk in our shoes. And we've walked in their shoes for a long time, you know? So we understand more, but we understand more of the negative and issues. But I mean, that's kind of just my feelings. But
Mhm.
I would jump on it if it was me.
Yeah, it's just one of those things where, I've had such strong feelings about it, like,
Yeah.
and I'll admit it, I when I came out of high school, I had a scholarship from Cameco, I had a summer job from Cameco, I benefited a lot from that company, but then, I saw kind of like your son's commenting in here, his friends got cancer. I saw a lot of that in people that I worked with, and that lifestyle and how people came home, and it kind of perpetuated these illnesses that we had in our community in terms of addiction and mental health, right? Like it's not an environment that's like conducive to health really.
Yeah.
But and then on the other side of that is like the impact on the environment and how much do people from our community actually really benefit. Like people are still freaking hungry, and like there's still so much like of an imbalance in power, and it's like a multi-billion-dollar company, or well, was, but and multi-billion-dollar industry. So I don't know. But I think, yeah, that that whole topic on like people need to be at the table, right? Like once, if this exploration leads to a project, like, you're gonna sit there later and be like, oh well, shit, I wish this didn't happen, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, well, did you go? Did you tell them what you thought? Did you inform yourself on what's happening? I think um that's just like my message to people that are listening. Like if you see the events shared, like attend those things and share like your true opinions and what you think is important to you. So
So, I mean, going back to that whole idea of industry, you see, the practice when this whole idea of consulting came out, I mean, what I talked a bit about that before, but the practice has been, have a couple of town hall meetings, come into the community, have a meeting. Their mind engagement. That's not engagement. Engagement is not a one-time process. Engagement is we sit and we talk. We don't walk away from each other. We
mhm,
want exactly what you're doing it, how you're doing it, where you're doing it, and we want to be part of that process.
mhm,
That's the only way where you can put in mitigating factors in order to prevent a lot of what we're talking about, right? And to
mhm,
really have a dialogue. with our people, and to be able, even at the end, if the community says no, we don't want it, to be able to walk away from that. As a,
Yeah.
you see, they need to face up to that. Right now, baseload company that wanted to do exploration up here, um, the ministry is really pushing for it. They're really supporting them. And I know they really want to go ahead with it, even though we said no. Hold on, there's some caribou out there that we want to ensure their survival. There's travel things out there, when we need to have a meaningful consultation. Well, we're going to talk about this, how it's going to be all done, not them telling us how it's going to be done, because that's how they do it. They tell us, and then they throw these other little things in there to try and make us feel that, yeah, it's going to be safe, it's going to be okay, we're listening to you, but in reality they're not.
Yeah.
I strongly have a suspicion, I strongly feel that a lot of these permits were already processed even before that company comes to see us, and
Mhm.
make assumptions here, right? I don't have, but that's just based on history, right? That's based on what has happened in the past. And
Mhm.
those are things that really, really need to change.
Yeah. Prove us wrong.
Partners, they can't just come here and say, okay, we're going to do this. And well, we want to know how you're doing it. Is it going to be safe for our community? How are you prevent 1,000 years down the road from anything happening? Those are issues that we really, really need to talk about.
Mhm.
We're prime picking up north here because a lot of us are complacent. We don't know how to talk. We don't know how to let this all out and really talk and have a dialogue. This kind of stuff. This is what we need to do. We
Yeah.
empower each other and to recognize, because I bet you right now there's a bunch of people. I don't know how many people are listening, but I bet you a lot of them are saying, yeah, yeah, yeah. But we got to have those discussions. We have to with our people. And I see Candace down there. So, but
Like, yeah.
yeah, there are things we really, really need to talk about. We can't be afraid.
Mhm.
We do, because what are we going to have in the end?
Yeah.
What are we going to be left with?
Mhm.
There are things we really, really need to talk about.
Yeah.
Somebody that's living in Toronto couldn't care less what's going to happen 100 years down the road in my backyard. Pull out what they want, go home. There, I don't need to live there. And then we have to deal with the aftermath.
Mhm.
I want to know what's going to happen 100 years down the road. And what
Yeah.
are we left with? How are we going to fix that? And those are important issues we really need to talk about.
Yeah. Well, and even like you look at, reclamation projects, they say they monitor and they reclaim and then monitor the land for like 100 years. And who ensures that that companies do that, and and how do we ensure that? But it's interesting. I think, you and I have both kind of been a part of the 155, and we got to see how that kind of a collective and that kind of a voice really helps to amplify the voice of one and our whole collective community as one as well, right? Like that was a really good example of collective efforts really making a difference. Like we had ministers that were joining calls and people were actually listening, right? And that's when we have organized, structured voices that are kind of leading the charge. I think that's very, very helpful, and I think, even looking at you, for example, at an individual level, right? Like people don't know that Ron sent I said, what do you want to talk about today? He sent me 16 just a big long list. I was like, holy shit, okay. But people don't know about those small steps that, like, they're huge. Like that's huge. I was reading those questions, and those questions need to be answered. Like that's incredible. So good on you for doing that. And I'm interested to see, hopefully if some of our local government people, whether that's MNS or First Nations or municipal or provincial, whatever, how where do we go with these conversations, and how do we amplify voices like Ron? So that's what I'm curious about. um, so a little poking and prodding to those people, but also at like a community level. Ron and I are a part of a little bit of a caribou project, not a little bit, a big one. That's it's huge for their community, and that's where I really got to dig into Ron's brain and learn about his community and his life, and caribou and the importance of that. And there's like companies like the Center of Excellence, and you've met with Sheldon Whitney and that crew. But it's like those kinds of things. We need to start involving like key people that are going to like help push these things forward. So I'm hopeful, Ron. You give me hope. So thank you. And I don't know if people have questions or where you want to go next with this convo. I'm here.
I'm good. I probably can talk all night, but
Yeah.
I mean, there are so many issues. There are so many things that we need to tackle, and then we need to kind of prioritize those issues. But we can't identify those issues until we start having a dialogue as Indigenous peoples. And I think we do that if we can be raw and honest with each other and
Yeah.
start issues for ourselves, because that's kind of the housekeeping process. Because if we're going to do something meaningful for our children down the road, and like I said earlier, then we need to get our own act together. And part of that process is identifying those issues. What are those barriers? What are those things that are actually keeping us from achieving this? And
Mhm.
we need to do that. I mean, all we have to do is like you look when you go back to a lot of those 155 discussions. I mean, sometimes it got pretty heated, you know, and but it's indicative of what's happening in society.
Mhm.
And there again, we, we kind of are there again. Like when I talk about being socialized, that the government is correct in everything they do or say. I
Mhm.
mean, we've been told that. That's how we've been brainwashed, right? But when I sat in and listened on the 155, no, and a lot of times the left hand didn't know what the right hand was doing,
Yeah.
that, right? And I think that kind of told me, yeah, okay, there we go, But because in my mind, we've been sold on this idea that they do everything perfectly. No, they don't, and
Mhm.
that's why they need us.
Mhm.
They need to engage us. Throughout the years, they haven't done that. They just step over us, and they've never really engaged us. Like I had stated, in all my years dealing with the resource officers, there's only one time where they asked me how many wolves are out there. What's the wolf population like? That's only one out of how many, you know, and probably other trappers can attest to that. Because what we need to get over is this whole adversarial us against them idea. Uh, a lot of these departments, I'm going off again here, but a lot of departments, if you look at the resource the resource department, they were built to down. That's what they were police us. That's what there, and so that institutionalized. I got to be careful here, but I'll say it anyway. That institutionalized racism is so prevalent right now. It's there. It's alive and it's active. And until they look at it and begin to look at their policies and their practices. Okay, I'll give you an example. I told you before, but my brother a few weeks ago was out here, just coming back from hunting, and we do this all the time, where we put a clip in when we're out in the bush. We're alone.
Yeah.
Nobody's miles, And he had a clip, and he was coming over one of our portages here, and he met up with a couple of resource officers. He wanted to check his gun, and I asked, "Why did you say okay?" He said, "Well, they had guns. I was afraid." so, so he let them. There was a clip in there. So rather than working on a process of reconciliation, right? You know, that whole idea, they charged him. He's not even employed. Like he's got a fine of $450 or something like that. You know, why didn't they say like, you know, maybe it's dangerous what you're doing. Can you not do that? Put away your clip. You know,
Yeah.
what's the harm in that? But
Mhm.
no, right away. You know, they gave him a ticket, and that was, you know,
Yeah.
I don't know. Those are things. I just
I have a funny story about CO. My top on, you probably know him, Nap Johnson. Yeah.
know that.
He yeah, so he used to be a CEO, and I heard stories he was a young man, and there were like they would be refugees, I guess, people from Germany, and they were moving to like little cabins out in the bush, and fleeing from their country to stay safe, kind of thing.
Yeah.
And he was sent to go take away their guns. And it's like, well, how are they gonna hunt? How are they gonna survive out in the bush? They don't got anything. Like, so he was sent out to do these things, right? And he said sometimes he would leave them with a gun, not tell anybody, and just like leave them one gun so they could still hunt and live, really. But I think that's there's something there where it's like those systems were built to oppress. I completely 100% agree. And, as long as those systems still exist and still function the way that they always have, the way that our hierarchy or our socioeconomic statuses with people, and it's like race, right, is kind of how you look at it. Like, that's not going to change, right? So we need to change those actual systems and the foundations of those. But we need to, like, also, as individuals, just as people, and I think we do a really good job of this as Indigenous people. We just kind of love everybody, right? But is to remember, like, I have friends who are COs. I have family who are cops. I have, like, people that have those roles, and sometimes they have to do things that they don't even agree with, but because those are the systems that kind of dictate how they have to operate, how they have to live, and how they have to treat us. And it's just like, and then there's that whole divide and conquer thing again. We just, we can't seem to get along in that way. And
I just love like the way one of our police officers is thinking, and I really like the way he put it when it comes to and things regarding his position as an RCMP officer. For him, what is right? What is the right thing to do? Not
mm-hmm,
what the law says, but what is the right thing to do? You know, and I think that's a way for them to look at it, because a lot of those expectations for carrying out policies and rules and regulations,
mm-hmm,
they were there to oppress us, and a lot, and they're still there. They're still
mm-hmm,
prevalent, you know. So, I mean, for a lot of if there's going to be good faith and goodwill by the government, and the Saskatchewan government, it's really bad for this, but. When we're starting to look at the Truth and Reconciliation recommendations, yeah, we need to redraft and revise and look at a lot of those policies, legislation, and everything if we want to do this. If we want
mm-hmm,
a better future for Canada, then you've got to have, again, those meaningful consultation processes with
mm-hmm.
people that you're making regulations for.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I used to be jaded and have this idea that, like, oh man, we're from Saskatchewan, right? I moved to BC for a little while. I was in Vancouver, and I tell people, yeah, I'm from Saskatchewan, and they're like, oh my God, I'm so sorry. And I'm like, I know it sucks. It's the prairie, like, whatever, just being that person. But now, like, and especially, working a little bit in like the clean energy sector, and talking more about environmental initiatives, issues, really. It's Saskatchewan is kind of really a really, really interesting place in Canada. Hey, it's like some people don't even know where the hell it is, but it's like you look at the energy economy that we have, like as unequal and unbalanced as it is, and like industries up here and people are kind of down here, like that's opportunity, right? There's things can change, right? And like, more people start thinking like Ron, things change, so I'm kind of more excited these days, as like odd that it may be, like where we are kind of, and there's this like national scorecard on energy efficiency and conservation initiatives in Canada, and we're like at the bottom. The one before us last year was, or just below us last year, was Prince Edward Island, and now they're at the top when we're still at the bottom. Like, we have so much work to do, and Saskatchewan is just like, just so back here. But
it's not good.
no.
Yeah, well, that's what I'm saying. With my dialogue with the ministry, yeah. Even when I mentioned like why I'm asking you this and why I'm bringing this, there's never any to point that out and say, yeah, we appreciate that you love the land, and they don't they won't affirm that, because it doesn't mean anything to them.
Mhm.
Doesn't even click in here, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd be interested to hear, at Sask Party, and I'm just gonna like straight up throw this out there, like if a Sask Party person were interested in having these discussions with us, and I know, like government is very much limited, or I guess like blocked on what they can say publicly, but imagine where that could go, hey, like having kind of an open discussion.
Yeah, yeah, I think so. Um, and like I said, quit patronizing us, and make it meaningful. Don't promise us things, or because you get so much of that, they walk away and that's it. But again, um, we got to have that meaningful dialogue. We have to, and make change, meaningful change.
Mm-hmm.
Means we look at things, and start tearing apart things and building again. We have to.
Yeah.
I don't. I really. I hope that that'll happen down the road at some point.
Mm-hmm.
But right
Well,
now,
go ahead. Sorry, I interrupted you.
it's fierce. It's falling on deaf ears, and that's unfortunate.
Yeah. Well, hopefully they've got a hearing aid and they'll hear us today.
Hopefully, yeah. I'll, I'll still write. Yeah, I'll keep writing to the ministry, try and get answers.
Yeah.
Because what I'm trying to get is, how are you making these decisions when there's no relevant data pertaining to our caribou out there? How can you make a decision when already Canada has mandated you to put plans in place so that the caribou will survive, their habitat will thrive? Okay, we know, all the land users here know that right now the caribou are struggling out there. There's not very many of them. Now, here's the other thing that I pointed out too, because of the fires. What I think is happening in our area here, because there's been so many fires, that this little herd is now has boundaries and barriers,
Hmm.
where that other caribou can't come in now and mix that genetic.
Oh,
Here is that maybe
that's
there's
their
a little bit of green now that they're living on, right? And then that's where they're migrating and moving around, right, in that general area. And I honestly fear that they can't get out, and that's what I would really, really like to know. And And I know that they're looking at different areas and stuff like that with some of those studies, right? And I don't even know how far they've gotten with him. But like I said, they're supposed to be wrapping this up in June. But I highly suspect that's not going to happen.
Huh.
From, just from talking with them and stuff, and
Yeah.
just from documents and things, right? Uh, but yeah, that's my fear with that. And we're not probably the only people. There's probably other areas in similar situations because of uh, devastating issues for them down the road, especially when they start just mating within their group, right? Then
Mm-hmm.
genetic issues, right?
Huh. I didn't know that.
Yeah, that's my fear, and that's what I've been trying to say. Like, how can you allow an exploration company to come in here? What are you using? What are you falling back on? If you don't have data or you don't have studies to fall back on, well, what are you using?
Mm-hmm.
What good practices or best practices are you using in order to make your decision as to who gets a permit and who doesn't?
Yeah.
So
Well, and it's interesting, like it is a draft right now, but it's like these are their rules and they're not following them. It's a little
it's
um
a contradiction. They'll say one
contradicting, yeah.
thing, right? Oh, we care about the caribou, which is a really serious issue for us, but we'll let that company go in there anyway. It's a, it just makes me mad. It just gets me. Say
Well,
that, you know,
let your anger fuel your passion. And I think it does, my friend.
not listening. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, do you want to share one last funny story or happy story to leave our last few people that are listening on a good note?
Pretty hard to draw one up on when, like I think my brain kind of shut down. I think it was in the process of sharing. I usually come up with ideas and stories, but I think my brain,
That's all right. Somebody came wrote a good point here that we didn't talk about. But logging, the logging industry.
there you go. You see, and one of the things that I saw in they call it what's the word they use? It has to do with human factors in industry and stuff like that. But when it comes to our area here, uh, because I think that the caribou populations they're well at the threatened state. Um, with the industry coming in, especially logging, they will drive away the caribou
Mm-hmm.
because I mean they're deforestation, right? They're cutting and nothing's left for them to go and survive or eat or even for shelter, right? You know.
Well,
So
and we were talking about the little phantom caribou, I think, and you were saying they're very sound sensitive.
very, and even with hunting, and I know that a lot of people who use snow machines, by the time you come on a lake already, they're running because they were hurt, right? You know. Yeah. So, but back again, when we first started this discussion, there is a study. I wish I could pull that out right now, but I don't have it in front of me. But there is a study that was done where where I stated that it's not the hunters, the subsistence hunters, the First Nations peoples that are reducing the population of caribou. It's not them. It's industry that's doing it, and there's always that tendency to say, yeah, it's it's the people that are doing it. No, it's not. It's because they come there and they do all the damage. They scare them away. They ruin their habitats, really. You know,
Mhm.
so you got to face up to that. I think
Mhm.
Saskatchewan, especially. I wish they I guess the more we need to speak out, we need more people speaking out, definitely. Right?
Mm.
You know?
Well, I think here's an opportunity if people, especially from people from Birch Narrows, where Ron is from, we're pulling together interviews and some of this research and community-based stuff from local people, and we want to hear stories like Ron's stories, right? So to be able to protect the caribou and the land. So and by all means, like I'm here too. Like I have this platform and I'm fully open to, providing it's a respectful and positive message. Like I'm always open to helping people share these things. So yeah, get a hold of me and Ron, and I think, the more people that share and talk about, from their own perspective and historical perspective as well. It doesn't have to be like you go and hunt and fish, but your kukum and musham, or your setsuna, the grandparents and your family.
Yeah. See, here's the thing for those that are listening. What identifies us as Indigenous people is our language, our culture, right? And right now, honestly, the government is driving us off the land. They,
Mm-hmm.
and we have to make our presence known. Otherwise, they're going to come in there and say, well, nobody's here. No one's here. There's no trap line. Nobody's fishing. Nobody's picking berries. Nobody has a tent. Nobody here, you know. And once they do that, we'll move in, take over, because no one's using it. They're not using it anyway. They've lost their culture. Here's another thing that I really want to point out about culture too, and I'll just make a brief statement on this, because what I really hate is when people say, "Yeah, you've lost your culture. You don't have your culture anymore." No, we forget that culture is dynamic. It's not static, and we still have our culture. So if you want to go back and retrieve some of what we used to do, well, then by all means, let's do that. But let's not tell our kids we've lost our culture, because what we're doing is we have that failure mentality still, and what we're doing is we're confusing them. We need to celebrate what we do have,
Mm-hmm.
and then the stuff back there that's going to help us today. By all means, let's do that. But let's not say we've lost our culture, because we haven't. We have to quit doing that, because
Yeah.
we're into that. We're buying into it, and I hate it. I just don't like it, because a lot of us are frantically running around trying to borrow, steal, or whatever to try and identify, and then we feel lost, and we're wandering and we don't even know who we are. But let's celebrate what we have, build on it, and then
Mm-hmm.
oh yeah.
Um, what do they mean we have no culture? He said, look around, my girl. This is our culture. We're the keepers of this land, and this land is our culture. It's our job to protect. Um, I really like that one, and it takes me back to a story. One of my really good friends, his dad is just like this incredible person, right? And I introduced myself as, a member of Black Lake. Our family has some weird ties, right? So I don't actually feel like a part of the community sometimes. It's a weird thing, and yeah, culture is not static. And the way he just looked at me and he said, Jordan, oh, because I made a joke. I was like, I have a little bit of an identity crisis, that kind of thing. And he just said, I don't want to ever hear you say that again. And then I was like, okay, sorry. Like, and he just said, do you know that idea was imposed on young Indigenous people so that they would believe that there was something wrong, that they didn't fit anywhere? And so we were continually like put in this mindset that we don't belong anywhere, so we would remain lost. Right? So I absolutely love what you're saying. And I met this old man, and like 10 minutes I was just crying. I was like, I belong. but it was such an important conversation, and it's like it's very real that a lot of people feel that way. I remember going to school in Saskatoon, and I left here and I was like, oh my God, all these like, you know, academics, they know so much about our history, about like our Indigenous culture. There's powwow dancers, there's all these people that do this. And, you know, here's little me from Isle of Cross. Like, it's like, I didn't even like, you know, feel native when in those spaces. And then as I grew older, I was like, no, you know what? I'm a bush girl and I'm more native than you. And that's like that whole divide and conquer thing. It's like, it's such a crazy thing. But I really like that culture is not static. It's dynamic. I really like that. Well, you got a lot of love from the audience here. People are just like, here's one guy, he's trying to promote his political party. Well, but your son is very proud of you.
Oh yeah, look at that.
You're so strong. Candace is loving the convo. Candace is such a powerful speaker. Yes. Look, she even speaks Dene. This one. D. But yeah, I don't know. I think this will not be the last conversation. And, you know, I think that we need to, I want to hear an update from what happens with Saskatchewan government and where this conversation goes. So I think people that are listening, you know, if Ron's up for it, we'll have a little bit of an update. And I know I was already getting some messages on other people that are working on caribou and land protection projects that are also interested in joining our next conversation. So yeah, so you've already started to stir the rubaboo.
Good. I like that. Yeah, stir the rubaboo.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's only going to get better if we do.
Right. Cool. Yeah. Well, thank you, my friend. It was such a good conversation, and I know people, you know, will learn so much from this, and hopefully it like sparks something for them to do something. So thank you. You're a very special person.
Thank you. Guys, take care.
All right. Thanks everyone for listening to us.
As there's a character on YouTube. I think his name's Robert Bodine. Dene. I just love it. Peace out. That's what he does all the time.
That's awesome.
Robert Bodine, check him out. He's another good character. He's pretty good.
Cool. I will check him out. All right. Well, take care, everybody. Take care.
Good evening. Yeah. Thank you.